Hey everyone, in this video I'm just going to go over how to make a API gateway attached to Lambda attached to DynamoDB and just kind of talk through those pieces. I feel like this is like a common thing that you're going to want to do, and yeah, just kind of wanted to talk through what that looks like. So the first thing I did this earlier. You can do SLS create template, and we're going to go with the AWS Node.js template, and then I just gave it a path. So that generates something like this. So I'm just going to get rid of all these comments here just so we can see what's actually here. Yeah, get rid of all this stuff. Okay, so this is what you get out of the box. So we got a service, we got a provider, a Node.js, going to default to Node.js 12, that makes sense, and we have a function. And if I look at what's in here, we get this really simple function. Got to get rid of all these semicolons, of course, or I do. Actually, let's just get rid of this whole thing here. So it's just handing back some sort of object. I'll just actually we do need JSON.stringify here. So let's just do data something. Okay, that's good. Let's get rid of these comments. And there we go. Let's get rid of this useStrict. Great. And if I wanted to make this, expose it with if I had to deploy this right now, it's just going to be a function, that's it. And if I want to actually get at it, I need to figure out like a trigger. How am I going to get this function working or invoked or whatever? There's a few different ways you can do it. It could be invoked by an event, which is like SNS or something. More traditionally or more commonly, you're going to want to invoke it through some sort of endpoint. So let's do that. So we'll do events, and we're going to say HTTP. So this little thing here, that means in YAML this is an array. So we're going to say going to have an array, and the method is going to be get, and the path is, let's just do that. Okay, let's go ahead and deploy this thing. So SLS deploy. Actually, I don't want to deploy because I want to set the region to US East 2, just so that we can look in an empty region, at least on my account. Okay, so it deployed. We got this URL here. Let's go check that URL out. And it works, wonderful. Okay, so next step we need to do is deploy a DynamoDB table, and this is going to take a little bit more to do. So first of all, let's go ahead and define the DynamoDB table. And what we have to do is we have to define it in something called resources. So just to give you some sort of like context around what's the difference between resources and functions. Isn't a function a resource? The serverless framework really helps with the abstraction over top of defining a few things such as lambdas and attaching them to events, or like, so this line here is creating, behind the scenes is creating an API gateway resource and a bunch of other stuff. And so that's really good. But if we want to define resources ourselves, we would put it underneath these two things here. And so everything past resources here is actually CloudFormation. And so you could, so from here on out, this is not the serverless framework, this is just straight CloudFormation. You can look up docs on all the different things that you could do with CloudFormation. In this case, we're defining a table, and the type of it is AWS DynamoDB table, and then properties, and there's a bunch of properties. This is sort of the pattern that CloudFormation stuff follows. You have, like, this is like a variable name, we give it whatever name we want. But then we say, well, this is the type of thing we want, and then here are the following properties on this thing. So with DynamoDB, I typically want to always set billing mode to pay per request. What this means is I'm not going to try to predict what the traffic's going to be and pay for a certain capacity. I'm just going to pay per request. So like, if no requests come in, I don't want to pay anything. If requests do come in, then I'll pay for it. So I'd be saying, well, why wouldn't you always do that? I think for a lot of times you do always do this, but if you really know your traffic, other paying modes are cheaper. But if you don't know your traffic or you're going to have very little traffic, this is the way to go. So I always do this. And then we got a table name. We got a bunch of strange things here. So this is serverless.yaml specific stuff. Whenever I do a $ curly brace. So in here I'm saying self-service. That means this right here. So table example is going to be put right here. And then stage. So I'm either going to do the option stage. This is like a flag when I run my CLI command. If there is none, it's going to default to self.provider.stage. And I have none set here at the moment. So what I'm going to do is actually no, this will work because it's going to default to dev. So okay, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to deploy this, but when we create resources in AWS, we have to, if we want one resource to talk to another, in this case our Lambda to talk to our DynamoDB table, we need to explicitly give it permissions. And so I'm just going to copy and paste this one line here and then talk through it here. So in my provider, I can say, okay, I want a certain kind of permissions to be true on all my functions. And this this thing here is a certain pattern, is an object, and well, an array of objects, because we can tell it by that little tick there. So from YAML's perspective, this is an array of objects. We're going to say, okay, I'm going to allow things. These are the actions I want to allow. So DynamoDB query, get item, put item, and so on. These are things I want to allow my functions to be able to do. And okay, so those are actions. What resource can they do these things on? And that's what this is. And this is kind of a scary line, so let's go over it. In AWS, every resource has an address, what we call an ARN, or a unique ID, I suppose. And you could sort of think of it like folders in your computer. So everything's, like the root is ARN, and then these two colons, think of it as like a slash in your folder path. AWS, okay, what resource are we talking about? We're talking about DynamoDB. And okay, what region? Because you can have it in multiple regions. We're going to say this is kind of a nice way to just put in the region that we're defaulting to. In order to do this hash, I actually need to install a plugin. So I'm going to put that in here. And I'm just going to go ahead and install that really quick. So I'm going to do npm install. I should have npm installed -d, because it's really only for dev, but whatever, it's fine. And okay, so that plugin is going to allow us to do, so this is not $, this is hash. This is basically just extending what the serverless framework is allowed to do with these things. So we're going to get the region that we're automatically deploying to and put that right here. We're going to get the account ID. If you have an AWS account, you have an account ID. And so we're going to grab that and put it right in here. Then from this point on, it's a little bit different per service. So in this case, for DynamoDB tables, you table /, and we're basically putting the same thing that we had put to define the table name here, so that it's going to link up. Okay, wonderful. And if I want to start hitting this database within my Lambda function, I'm going to want to get the name of the table as an environment variable. So I'm just going to throw that environment variable. So again, it's the exact same thing as what I'm saying here and here. So we're just going to make that available in our code through environment variable. Okay, so let's go ahead. Oh, I gotta npm init first. Okay, I'm gonna install this plugin and then deploy. Okay, now let's take a look at what it's deployed. If I go into my DynamoDB console and refresh, I should see a table. Wonderful. Okay, so table example -dev, that makes sense because when I deploy without a stage with serverless framework, it's going to automatically be dev. Now what we want to do is interact with this DynamoDB table. So we have everything set up properly here. We're going to have permissions to hit this database. We have our environment variables. Let's go into our handler here and set up some sort of database call. So what I'm going to do is bring in an AWS SDK. You will notice that I do not have that in my dependencies at all. This will be fine when we deploy it because the AWS SDK is available to Lambda functions automatically in the environment. So we don't need to install that locally. But if you're running tests, then you may want to make this a dev dependency, but we don't need to deploy it a package.json or a node modules, including the AWS SDK, because it's a big size anyways, and so we don't want to unnecessarily make our Lambda function big if it already has access to it. Okay, so I'm bringing in AWS SDK, I'm bringing in the table from our environment variables, I'm setting up the DynamoDB document client, and we don't have a region set as environment variable, so I'm just going to default it to US East 2 for now. And next, let's make a create function. So I'm just going to copy this code in here. So I'm going to do const create equals this. So just talk through this. I'm just going to DynamoDB here. I'm going to do .put. I'm going to promisify it. So by default, if I don't do this, it's going to want to return a function like a callback. Callbacks are kind of lame. Or they're not lame. They're just something I don't want to do if I don't have to. I'd rather use async await. So that's what I'm going to do here. And the params, I'm going to figure out what's the table name, and then I'm going to specify the item I want to put into that table. And so in this case, I am putting data.id into pk and data.name into name. Let's look at our serverless.yaml file to look at our table here. You'll notice that I set pk, which stands for partition key. This is just a name I'm making. I could have made it anything I want. I could have said ID or something else. But in this case, just my convention or pattern, I like to call it pk. And I'm going to say that we're going to key this whole thing on this on the pk. So when we look at our table, we can see that items, it has a pk value, but it doesn't have anything else. We can put whatever we want, whatever else we want on top alongside the pk, but each item must have one of these. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some code here. So I'm just going to get rid of that, and I'm just going to put in a wait create, and we'll just put in something like ID is 1, 2, 3, 4, and name is dark coffee. So let's go ahead and deploy that. So we'll go SLS deploy. Okay, so it deployed. Now let's hit that endpoint, which is should automatically run that create call or command or whatever. Let's refresh the database. Ooh, sort of wonderful. It made something. Obviously, I made a spelling mistake. Let's take a look. Name MAME. Let me redeploy that. Okay, I redeployed it. Now let's go ahead and run this this URL again. So let's hit it. Okay, and let's refresh. Okay, wonderful. Now it's correct. You'll notice that I didn't create another one. So this is sort of, it's happening because of the way we're using the DynamoDB AWS SDK call. A post, at least in HTTP, like a post is going to, the idea is it's going to create a new thing, but a put call is going to insert something regardless of whether it exists or not. And so I generally like to work that way always, is to just put things and try to make my IDs as deterministic as possible. I actually don't like using unique IDs if I don't have to, but that's a whole other discussion. So I feel like the more deterministic you can make things, the more straightforward they can be, but that means they're going to override things if they already exist. So you have to structure your app in such a way that you're okay with that. Anyways, so there you go. That's a quick run through of how you would set up an endpoint with Lambda with a DynamoDB table.